of today's conversation is to get beyond the statistics and stop talking about these kind of, dry things and get a little personal. So, that said, I'm going to open with a statistic. Women make 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. And I want to step away from the whole systemic, we're trying to play catch up because we've only been in the workforce the last, few decades. And I want to get to women's seeming reluctance to actually talk about money. I'm from the South, and you don't talk about age, you don't talk about weight, and you don't talk about money. So did anybody teach you guys how to negotiate, how to, financially take care of yourself? Jamie, did you?
Yeah, I think I was lucky in that my mother worked. She was an executive when I was growing up, and she took it upon herself to make sure that I had a good sense of financial acumen, that I got a bank account nice and early, and she taught me how to balance my checkbook, and just having that female role model in the house that was a dominant breadwinner, I think made a big difference. And I have two daughters now, and they both have bank accounts already, and we talk about budgets, and so I think that made a big difference for me.
That's great. So you grew up managing your own money.
Yeah.
What about you, Bridget?
I guess the same story. My mom worked full time. My dad was an actor, as they said in the old days, a starving actor. So my mom was kind of the primary breadwinner, right? So she definitely showed us the example, and I kind of took that into my own career. I am the primary breadwinner most of my career. So when you are in that position, I think you take that a little bit more seriously. Although I was not really good at asking for money until maybe in the last 10 years or so. But I think you have a little bit more confidence in that when you are the one, Not that it should warrant if you're not the one, you shouldn't equally be paid. But in my situation, yeah.
Amber, were you ever taught to negotiate, to sit down and kind of hammer out a salary or figure out what you're worth? Talk to other women, especially in the industry, and see what everyone's making? And
No?
I
don't think so.
Did you learn on the fly?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about systemic bias for a minute. So we've gotten past this phenomenon of, the pinching the rear, or calling you honey, or sending you to get coffee. For the most part, I feel like we've kind of evolved past that. And what we're actually dealing with now is a more kind of ingrained, nuanced, subtle type of bias. So I wanted to talk to you about how you approach that. When a boss tells you you look nice, how do you know if that's a compliment or if it's suggestive? And even more, how do you go and talk to somebody else about that? Because you can't convey tone, you can't convey body language. Have you guys ever encountered something like this, and how did you handle it? Jamie?
That's a tough one. I think intuition plays a lot into it. I certainly don't hesitate giving compliments to my male colleagues when they have a fresh haircut or a new suit.
Right.
And it's never been misconstrued as anything more than a compliment. I think there's a way that they need to be delivered. There's certainly a professionalism that comes with it. Saying you have a nice outfit is much different from something much more suggestive. So I think there's a balance there. Where I've experienced people crossing a line that I wasn't comfortable with, I've used humor to manage it in the situation and try to diffuse it with humor, but still get my point across. But I would say it happens, maybe the older I've gotten or the more senior I've gotten, the less often that line gets crossed. And where I see it get crossed with younger women or people that I mentor, then I'll be the one to call it out.
So Amber, what about you? When you encounter things like this, do you do the same, what we call it de-escalation tactics, where you laugh it off, or try to keep it from blowing up into something bigger?
I think so. And there's been times where I've had to say, like you said, call it out directly. and say this is not, how you talk to people or how you want to be spoken to. So sometimes, I think that the person may be unaware because it's that built-in bias, and you do have to tell them.
And what's the reaction when you tell them that?
Generally it stops. Yeah, in my experience.
Bridget, what about you? You run into this?
Sure. I think it's, especially I've been in the workforce probably longer than you two, but, so, and as I think it actually works both ways. I have seen women speak totally inappropriately in situations with men, and I've seen men speak, inappropriately with women. And again, the older I've gotten, the more confident I'm on that just says, hey, that's just not appropriate. Let's change the subject. Let's go somewhere else. Take that outside, whatever it is you're going to do. But I can see how if somebody is not that confident and they're in that situation, it's a sense. You either know someone's coming on to you or you don't, or very few people are completely blindsided. Like, oh, I never saw that coming, right? So I think you have to be aware. I think that's something we probably didn't have to be before. Now you have to be aware. And then I think you have to just have the confidence to say, hey, that makes me uncomfortable. I don't, could we, not have that conversation, or let's talk about something else. But that's a scary thing to do, especially when you're young.
Yes.
Because you think that person in power has control over you in some way. And that's really the only situation, not only, but I think that's the biggest situation in which this is trouble. Is when someone of power over you or your career is actually speaking to you or says things in a way that makes you uncomfortable. And I think you do have to be aware.
Yeah, I mentor a lot of young women. It's kind of a passion project of mine. And that's one of the conversations I always have with them when they're young and starting out, is be prepared for when this situation happens. Just get ahead of it, kind of visualize it, get ready for it, think about what your reaction will be so that when it does happen, because inevitably you will be in a situation where you're going to have to deal with it. So don't let it surprise you. Go through the motions of preparing for it well in advance. And also make sure that when you're in situations that might be work situations, but it's after hours, there's alcohol involved, make sure you really understand your surroundings, how you're going to handle that, have a buddy system, like just kind of going through the motions of preparation, I think can certainly do them a lot of good as they...
Do you have a similar conversation with your male direct reports?
These are mentees, not direct reports, and I wouldn't...
Okay. I'm sorry.
I wouldn't have that conversation with a direct report.
Do you mentor any men?
I don't mentor many young men, no. And the reason I've chosen to focus on younger women is really because there are so few female executives in tech in Canada, and we have such a challenge keeping young women engaged in the field. And part of it is a lack of role models, a lack of people they can identify with. They can have conversations about work-life balance, different issues that they couldn't have with a man. So just given the scarcity that exists of people in a position like mine to have those conversations with young women, I've made a conscious effort to make myself available more to the younger women. Not that I wouldn't love to mentor the young men as well, but they can have a conversation that with the male mentors that
Sure.
women just can't.
Amber, what about this conversation? I mean, I'm struck listening to Jamie talk that I don't know about you guys, but I'm a little bit resentful that I have to have this conversation and men don't. And I think that a good bit of that comes from the fact that it's not just within the workplace. I have to be aware of that from the time I wake up until the time I go to sleep. How do you approach this? Whenever you're talking to someone younger, or whenever you're going into a situation where you think maybe it might be an issue.
I think what you mentioned, to be prepared. So because a lot of it's mental. So if you've got the mental mindset ahead of time, I think that can help a lot. And I also think that sometimes you have to realize things aren't going to change. I've had situations where I think we didn't end up working with a client because of that, and in that case, you can't change that person.
Yeah.
They're in their mindset, and it's not going to be a good fit if they're not going to want to have that relationship or respect for you. and sometimes it's just not going to work.
I've heard that from a lot of women who work for MSPs in this space that I've spoken with. And I want to go back to something, Bridget, that you talked about a minute ago, about how scary it is, especially for young women or for women who are in a position trying to, get the business or get the promotion or, and something like that. How scary it is not just to speak up, but to tell someone who is in a position to help. How do you go to an HR manager and say, he told me I look nice today, or, something like that? What kind of advice would you give young women to, be able to kind of handle this if they're not equipped to directly confront the person who's insulting them?
Well, so I think the recent movement and all of the visibility is certainly helping, right? So as I put it, a lot of big trees have fallen in the forest, right?
I like that.
And we heard them.
We have,
Yeah.
and all of us have heard them. And, had that been only the president of Chevron or only the president of an MSP, we wouldn't have heard those trees. But we heard big, giant trees fall across major industries. And I encourage women to use that as part of their confidence going forward, right? They need to see that and know that gives them permission to say, that's enough. Or, you know what, I'd like to sit down and talk about my compensation, right? Or, I'd like to sit down and talk about a new job. Not every tree has to fall in the forest before we take responsibility for movement. And I have 14 nieces and I have 4
I'm sorry,
sons.
what?
14 nieces.
You have 14
Yes.
nieces?
And in my immediate family, I have 4 boys and a girl. And my boys totally get it, And maybe it's because they grew up with really strong women in their lives, right? They have very strong wives. They totally respect their wives. And it's a partnership. So I think there is this portion in this next generation. First of all, they were raised in a way that's much different than ours, that they do feel empowered. And I think that this whole recent last year or so visibility is giving those people confidence. Now, to your question about what about the ones who can't, they need to reach out to someone because they can't do it within themselves. They definitely have to reach out to someone and find a safe harbor that they can talk to. And I think that's kind of what you were saying,
exactly.
is that they may not have that in their workforce because they work with all men.
Right.
But I would be surprised. There are some sympathetic men who have wives and little girls that would probably be safe harbor.
And to your point about kind of the movement giving people the confidence to speak up, there was an article, I'm from Canada, there was an article in the paper this week that the Canadian Forces has seen a doubling, so a 200% increase in reported sexual assault over the past year. And that's not because there's been a doubling of assaults, it's women being more confident coming forward, and that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. It's a great thing.
And hopefully it'll build, gain momentum over
Absolutely.
time.
It already has.
Yeah.
So you raise a really good point. You talk about the Me Too movement and people, bringing this out of the realm of unconscious bias. We can no longer call it unconscious bias. Everyone in the country is talking about it.
Right.
So maybe that'll, help give voice to some women who
And
normally
it still
don't speak
happens.
out.
I mean, I'm in the high-tech industry, manufacturing world. It's still a lot of, older, Caucasian men that are dominant in those, customer-facing type of roles. So it's not gone by any imagination. But all those guys, most of them have daughters. And so it's really clicked. It really has.
Let me ask you a question. I apologize, I didn't prepare you for this, but when you mentioned that, I'm curious. So you're right. In this space, it is predominantly white men. Do you find that being a female has helped or hurt your career in any way?
Well, for me, I launched my own company because of it. I was working as an IT director and applying for jobs, and I was told things like, we've never considered a woman, or because my kids were younger at that time, so they were getting sick a lot, so I would ask about being able to take time off, and they said, what do you mean you want to work part-time? You don't want to work? And I was like, I have to start my own company. So because of that, that was a huge motivation for me to go ahead and start my own business and create the environment that would be conducive. We have 50% women in our company, unlimited time off from day one. Everybody works from home in flexible schedules so that people don't have to make the kind of choices that I went through. And they, if my kids get sick, they can stay at home with me. And I think for me, that's what inspired that. It was a huge part of it.
I think that's fabulous, and we're going to definitely touch on the whole motherhood penalty issue here in a minute. But I am curious from our other two panelists, have you noticed any impact in your career from being, a unicorn in this space?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think early in my career, I came up on the sales side, and being a woman opened some doors more easily in some situations. It also made it more difficult in a number of other situations in the way, and when I was focused on an executive career path, I had to navigate in a way that my male colleagues didn't.
Right.
So, but it's not all harder. There are
Right.
some doors that open more easily for you, but just as many are harder to get through, if not more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say definitely when I was young and I was having my children, there were jobs that were not available to me because I was working full time, but I also was the mom, and I had to be the mom, and I had to run the household, right? So definitely, my career definitely stalled in that time frame. But I will tell you that once my kids got older and were off to college, my career has done nothing but take off. Mm-hmm. Because there are companies that want strong female leaders in their ranks. They get the fact it differentiates them. They get the fact that they need that diversity at the table. And so from my experience, the last 15 years has been fantastic for me. But I definitely missed job opportunities, and that slowed me down. But I went back to work right after I had my kids. I didn't take long times off. One job, my daughter, I was off for 5 weeks. And I was like, I need to get back to work. I don't want to lose my position.
Yeah.
So there was a big price to pay.
Right.
But it paid off in the long run if you're playing the long game, for me.
I want to piggyback off of something that you said a few minutes ago. We were talking about sexual harassment, and you said, I've seen it go both ways. I've definitely seen, women be inappropriate to men. And on this topic, it occurs to me, this also goes both ways. When we're talking about this kind of insidious systemic bias and this traditional gender roles that are just embedded into the way that we live and
right.
the traditions that we learn. What is your take on the whole, let's switch it the other way around. There's women that are feel like they're forced to go back into the workforce, too soon. And there are men out there who want to be able to stay at home, and they have a hard time.
I think in Canada, we have parental leave policies, and you're seeing more and more men take advantage of that. I have a number of girlfriends that are primary breadwinners, and the husband stays at home. So it's not the norm by any means, but you're seeing a more generalized acceptance of it, and it's less rare. I suspect we'll see that continue. Dads want to be able to be home with their kids too. I think this next generation is more interested even in being active parents and being active participants, and they don't want to be the ones responsible for working all day and not getting that relationship with their children. So I'm optimistic for both sides.
What about you, Amber? You talked about having a business that's really focused on empowering working mothers and family time. Have you seen this phenomenon work both ways?
Yeah, I think it's. I live in Chicago, so much more urban area, and again, like you said, it's very common now. A lot of times, meet people who the husband is helping equally or more than equally with childcare. My husband's a teacher, so he has the kids all summer actually while I do work. For us too, it's been kind of reversed. And we want to, as our company too, we want to also. That's why we built the policies the way we did, so that it applies to both. It's not biased towards women or men either way. It would apply to any parental leave or any time off like that.
Yeah. I remember talking to a male MSP owner, and him talking about how when he worked for the big vendor, it felt so awkward for him to be the one to ask for time off to go, pick up the sick child, or get off early to go to the science fair. It's not that people were judging him harshly, but it was just a conversation that was awkward to still have.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about these kind of traditional gender roles, Jamie, you were speaking earlier about how young women really have to be careful about going out and having a drink at the bar with the boys, or there are a lot of business deals that get done over drinks at the bar. There are these type of situations that a lot of women are trying to figure out how to overcome, and we've come a long way in the channel, but I mean, let's be honest, it wasn't that long ago that we had booth babes at all the conferences, and there were still deals being done in gentlemen's clubs, to put it nicely. So how would you encourage, especially a young woman who might not have that confidence we were talking about earlier, how would you encourage them to try to create a situation in which it is an even playing field? If someone says, hey, let's go grab a drink after work, and she knows she's not going to be able to drink or have more than one, how can she turn that situation? How can she try to make that playing field a little more even?
It's hard. I encourage women to have their own network. So part of that advantage that guys have is it's easier for them to create an informal network where they support each other. And Canada's big on hockey. Most companies have corporate hockey leagues, and the guys have that as an informal network. And my coaching is, it's really hard to be part of that network for a lot of women, but it's important that you have a network. So there are tons of industry associations and ways that women can build networks of their own to get that support and that system built around them. And really, that's my advice. You're not always going to be at the table with the boys, but make sure you've got a table of your own to be at.
What about building some sort of network like that within an organization? It's great. I fully agree with you that women should take advantage of all these associations and organizations. And we're talking about, you've got a male and a female at the same level, and then they're competing for the promotion internally. How do you try to even that playing field? The sports is a great example. I spoke with a woman earlier in the year who talked about the all-male executive retreat. They go hunting every year, and she's not invited to go. So how do you walk that line between standing up and saying, I don't think so, and risk offending the very person that you're trying to impress?
Yeah, that's a tough question. It's situational. So in the example you just gave, which I'll use that one, where a company is still somehow having men's offsites, that's crazy talk. I mean, I don't know what state that happens in, but I'm in Silicon Valley, and it does not that's not, men's offsites in Silicon Valley are not happening. If they are, they're I don't want to say not happening, but they're not prevalent, and they're certainly disappearing because there are more women in the industry. I think it's situational. That one is, I think, one that might be a little, dramatic. But just even going to the hockey games, I mean, some women don't like hockey. They don't want to go to hockey, and guess what? They're working full time, and when their husbands are staying home, they want to go see the kids. Right. So they don't want to go out and sit at a hockey game they don't have any, interest in. Right?
I think that you were about to say something a moment ago when we were talking about how to walk that line.
I was just going to say, I think part of it is recognizing that that's not maybe a good fit for you professionally. Because
Right.
if you're in an environment
Get
like
another
that,
Get out of
you
there.
may not be able to change it, and it's better to just go somewhere that's a better fit. I think a lot of it's recognizing the limits, and that can be for a lot of different things other than even gender. But I think, to me, I've spent some time in a position where I felt like I was banging my head against the wall, and you kind of realize at some point that that's just a waste of time, and you need to go somewhere that you can do, better yourself, and just get ahead where people get it.
Yeah.
So when we were talking a moment ago about organizations and associations, what are some of the key things that women need to get out of these associations? There's a million of them. And, I mean, even just here in the channel, and then you look at the wider world of tech and then the wider world of business, there are so many. What should women look for in these peer organizations, and what should they look to get out of it? When should they say this one's not for me and try something else, or look to ask people for certain things?
And like anything, it's fit. You're looking to expand your network. You're looking to get people you can bounce different ideas off for different points in time in your career. You might, if you're in an all-male environment and something happens, you want to have somebody that you can call and say, "This just happened. What do you think? What should I do?" That's also in the professional world. You want a network that gives you insight to what's going on in the industry, gives you different perspectives. There's all different things that your network should be able to give you, but it's ultimately about fit and building relationships with other human beings.
Bridget, do you have any experience in this? Being able to tell people you should learn how to negotiate for a salary, for example, or build your network, as you were just saying. Are these some of the key traits that women should learn? And is this a good environment in which to learn them?
Yeah, so networking is such an interesting term for me. So men do this naturally, and then we have to somehow figure out how to do it. You know what I mean? It's like they have their network, they know how to do that whole thing, and then we're like, okay, you need to learn how to network. I don't know how to do that. What is that? And then we score differently, right? When we meet someone, we actually think we need to give them something in order to get something. And quite frankly, in a male, network, I'll use the word generically, that isn't how it is. They don't ever go in thinking. They may come in thinking I want something, but they are not coming in thinking I got to give you something first.
Right.
So that's a psyche thing, and I think that's a female thing that, in order to build your network, you have to move on. I was looking for a job about 10 years ago or so, and I realized that my entire network was in my company, and I didn't have a network outside my company. So I started, reaching out. I got involved with some associations. LinkedIn is the best tool on earth, by the way. If you can't build a network with LinkedIn, then you're not, you need to learn how to use LinkedIn to build your network overall. So anyway, that's what I think about it.
Amber, do you belong to any of these associations or organizations?
I do. I'm a PMP, so I'm very involved in the project management world, and I'm on the executive council, and I do the mentoring through there. I was doing a little bit with Sam, but it was all golf outings, and it was all at night. It wasn't something I was interested in. Those are the ones I'm mostly involved with, is through the project management side. But I think, that's a great idea to have that outside network.
So did you just say that you're a mentor to women in these?
Yes, through the Project Management Institute.
So what is the first thing that you make sure that you talk about whenever you develop this relationship? How do you start that off?
Well, the program I do is a formal mentoring program where you actually have you have to write statements about what you want to accomplish and goals. Again, a lot of that is more about becoming a project manager and advancing that profession. But I've worked with women who have been the mentees I've had, and I think it's about knowing your goals and then also knowing how achievable those goals are. Like I said earlier, some environments you're not going to be able to achieve those goals.
Sometimes your mentoring is focused on helping them figure out what their goals are, and that alone is value. Yeah, I mean, I've had lots of people, and they want, oh, I want you to be my mentor. Okay, sit down. So what do what are your goals? Where do you see yourself in?
Yeah.
I never do the 10-year thing, but like, where do you see yourself in 3 years? Okay, maybe 5 is even pretty far out. And they're like, oh, I don't know. I said, well, if you don't know where you're going, I mean, if you don't know where you want to be, how do you know how you're going to get there?
Well, sometimes the goal is I want to have kids in the next year or two. How is that going to affect my career? And what do I do? That can be something that you have to try to figure out.
Yeah, it's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we leave our audience with some takeaways that they can actually implement. So let's hear it. Your one piece of advice for business owners in the channel that if they come away with the session, here's the one thing they need to know and the one thing they should try to do in their businesses tomorrow.
Well, I mean, like I said, we have 50% women in our company, and I think that gives us a huge advantage. I personally find women to be amazing IT employees, and I would say hire more women.
I like that answer. Jamie?
I think the tone comes from the top. So CEOs and the leadership team need to be aware of the diversity of their organizations. They need to be aware of the culture and the tone that they're setting. And take an honest look at who they are and who they want to be with respect to the makeup of the workforce and the culture that exists there.
Lead by example.
Tone from the top.
Bridget?
So mine would be I'll use one that looks from the woman up. And so
Okay.
I think I totally agree with you. They have to understand the competitive advantages it delivers to them, and then they need to make it happen. My advice to women is be brave. Okay, and I tell this to my nieces, what is the worst thing they're going to say to you? When you ask for the raise, when you ask for the promotion, when you ask for the time off. And if you can deal with the worst thing that they can, then get in there and ask. Yeah. So my advice is be brave. There's not anything you can't ask for.
All three very great answers. Ladies, I am so grateful that you joined me today for this talk. I hope that our audience enjoyed it as well, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.
Nice meeting you.
Thank you.